almost, I think except for two people, nobody wrote the answer that I had asked you to write. आप तो ऐसे लेके आगे सर लिखा नहीं जा रहा, लिखो उसके बिना मैं चेक नहीं करूंगा. You have to take some efforts, otherwise my inputs are not useful. I am strong believer in that. ठीक है, तो please write that answer, bring it to me, we'll discuss at length if you want, no problem. Okay, so today we are starting with a very interesting, very fundamental, and also at the same time very important to the exam. That is the topic of French Revolution. Now, French Revolution is a huge topic. This topic goes on for almost 25 years, from 1789, when the revolution actually began, to 1799, when Napoleon declared himself to be the counsel for the life. तो ये 10 साल की बात है. And even beyond that, from 1799 till 1815, when he is finally out of picture and disbanded to some remote island in Atlantic. तो इस रिवॉल्यूशन के कई सारे फेजेस हैं. दिस इज द मेन रिवॉल्यूशन and this is the new revolution when Napoleon is taking control of it. He is shaping it, reshaping it, and then exporting it as well. So these are the two main stages. Even within that, the first 10 years are also interspersed with multiple phases. उसके भी अंदर मतलब if you see the whole duration, it is actually revolution in a literal sense. It started with a monarch at the beginning from the Bourbon dynasty. It ended with the monarch at the end with Bonaparte dynasty, and then again Bourbon dynasty. That is one. So पहिया जो है पूरा घूम के वापस वही लौट के आता है. Not only that, it has multiple revolutions within it. You know how many times they changed the constitution? 3 times. इसके अंदर 3 अलग अलग constitution, number 1, number 2, number 3 3 बार आते हैं. We have 5 governments coming and going within those 25 years. So 3 constitutions, 5 governments, and multiple coups and counter coups, revolutions and counter revolutions. So it's a bloody, it's a messy, it's a complicated and a long drawn event, and it is too much open to multiple interpretations about ये कितना सही था, कितना खराब था, कितना important था, कितना बेकार था. So much so that it has generated extremely rich amount of historiographical debate. There is an interesting thing that happened in 1989, 200 साल के बाद, 200 years after, in France. There they commemorated the bicentenary of this event of French Revolution, and immediately after that, the counter revolution was also celebrated, because at that time the government was not left wing. So the point is that revolution के अंदर तो झगड़े है ही, historians के अंदर भी है और समाज के अंदर भी है. So it's a very controversial event. Nonetheless, it is definitely extremely significant event, all the more so than American Revolution. American Revolution इसके पहले होती है, and we have seen that. It is fundamental. It is the first expression of the Enlightenment ideals, yes. But French Revolution is much more radical. It's look at the declarations. एक simple फर्क देख लो. In American Revolution, you have the Constitution, and then when the Constitution is about to get ratified, at that time, willy-nilly, grudgingly, they accept Bill of Rights. कि फंडामेंटल राइट्स को हम चलो कोई चारा नहीं है तो मान लेते हैं. Otherwise, the founding fathers are slave owners, property people. But in the case of France, there is definitely a similar thing that middle class is in the horseback. वो है ही, middle class का dominance है, no doubt. But look at the declaration of rights of man and citizen. which is nothing but the fundamental right or Bill of Rights kind of thing in case of France. Here, Declaration of Rights comes first. It defines, it gives the bottom line, ideological foundation for the upcoming constitution. तो राइट्स पहले आते हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बाद में आती है. एंड द राइट्स इटसेल्फ, इफ यू कंपेयर द टू बास्केट्स ऑफ राइट्स, ones which were given in American Revolution and the ones which were given in French Revolution, you will see French Revolution rights are much more universal, much more radical. They are not as radical as we want them to be. उसके भी limitations हैं, but compared to American, they are much more radical. So American Revolution is neat. नीट मतलब एकदम लेस मेसी, स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड, कि काम शुरू हुआ, काम खत्म हुआ, चलो घर. इन केस ऑफ फ्रेंच 25 साल चलता रहता है. तो इट्स वेरी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड बिकॉज अंडरस्टैंड द डिफरेंस. इन केस ऑफ अमेरिका दे डिड नॉट हैव द ओल्ड वर्ल्ड विद इन देम. कुछ 1-2 लाख पैट्रियोट्स होंगे, नोबल्स होंगे, उनको तुरंत उन्होंने रफा दफा कर दिया. बट इन केस ऑफ फ्रांस it is the old world and not the new world. You have the established monarchy, you have the aristocracy, you have the established state religion in the name of Roman Catholic Church. इनके सबके साथ झगड़ा बोलना है. And there is one more difference. America is far away. उसके आसपास कोई नहीं था जो बीच में उनके इंटरवीन करके परेशान करे. In case of France, every other country on its border is also monarchy. They also feel threatened. They also intervene इनसाइड फ्रांस की. भाई अगर आपके राजा को आपने हटा दिया तो कल हमारी जनता हमें हटा देगी, और आपके राजा की रानी तो मेरी बहन थी, तो मेरे रिश्ते में दिक्कत हो गई. तो फैमिलियर रिलेशनशिप एंड ऑल्सो द ओल्ड स्कूल और ओल्ड गार्ड सपोर्टिंग अनदर ओल्ड गार्ड, फ्रेटर्निटी भी है, सेम क्लास भी है. So you have the intervention from the outsiders into French Revolution, which made the things much more complicated, which was not there in case of America. इन केस ऑफ अमेरिका, अमेरिका का एक बड़ा फायदा हुआ, बहुत दूर तो था ही, बट ऑल्सो दे वेर नॉट सो मच यूनिफाइड. 13 डिफरेंट कॉलोनीज एंड नोबडी इन यूरोप एट दैट टाइम इमेजिन्ड कि ये लोग साथ में आ भी पाएंगे. दे थॉट कि वॉर तो जीत लिया, अब 13 देश बनेंगे. दे विल कीप फाइटिंग अमंग्स्ट ईच अदर, बट belying all the expectations of the old world, they could come together. But within that duration of a few decades, कोई इंटरवीन नहीं किया, उनको शांति से अपना प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करने का मौका मिल गया. फ्रांस में वो नहीं होता. So radicalness of French Revolution is very high because of the principles, because of the internal domestic issues, and also because of the external compared to American Revolution. So let me open my document. बातें किए जा रहा हूँ. If you have, see, this topic is very interesting. I'll tell you also one important thing. इस topic में we can do lots of things, but we have to limit ourselves. I will tell you every story. That is important. I will also tell you the entire narrative, but I have to also tell you that the questions are not asked from the entire narrative. मैं सारा बता तो दूंगा, notes में भी होगा, but the areas which are more important for questions are relatively limited. जहाँ से बार बार सवाल पूछे गए हैं, so we'll focus on that also a lot when it comes to answer writing perspective. But for the understanding sake, I will have to tell you entire story. ठीक है? So we'll begin before 1789 and end in 1815. It's a journey that would take around 3.5 to 4 lectures. The first lecture is entirely dedicated only and only to the events before 1789. Before 1789, that is causes. In the second lecture, we'll start with the course of the revolution. Then we'll go to Napoleon, and then we'll go to legacy, plus some question and answer. So that will be our entire duration. Minimum 3.5 lectures, maximum 4 lectures. Every year, you expect at least one question on this topic. In 4 lecture में से एक सवाल हर साल आना ही आना. That is a big thing. And that too, the questions are not that difficult. If you have a good understanding, you will get to know that there is lot of scope to go into conceptual and reveal your conceptual understanding. More so in this topic, you will get to touch some amount of historiography, typical history. That is okay for enough, okay enough for world history. Okay. Let me go on then and see if they have any comment to start with. Any doubt? Any query, Sudeep? कॉफी पीने का मौका होता है आज बहुत जरूरी भी है no doubt. Okay. So I hope you all remember in the European history, we had reached the point of enlightenment. We understood what its meaning was, how it spread, and everything. Do you recall that? Enlightenment was a principle of rationalism applied to all parts of human life, solve questions, progressive idea of human progress, and all those things. The a process of enlightenment was one important stage in the early medieval time, early modern time. It started with commercial revolution, mercantile revolution, the formation of larger absolutist state, Reformation, Renaissance, everything is there. It actually led to the emergence of, as we have seen, two important social classes. So one class was middle class, the mercantile community, or as you in this context would prefer to call them bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie मतलब वही French word. So you know from where the word bourgeois has come. तो शब्द का मूल अर्थ क्या है? Etymological root of the word bourgeois. It has come from B-O-U-R-G or B-O-R-G-H. This is the root word of bourgeois. इसका मतलब है शहर, टाउन. राइट? कई सारे यूरोपियन लाइक स्ट्रासबर्ग, एडिनबर्ग, right? So these work with town. So when we say bourgeois, originally it meant the people of town. What does it mean? It means the people who participate in the economic activity that is connected with cities. It is commercial, it is capitalistic. It is not the old feudal agricultural land related activity. They are capitalist people. They are the class as such arose out of mercantile revolution. And who was their friend? Their friend was monarchy. The monarchy was also feeling oppressed and feeble and weak in the hands of aristocrats and the church. Both of them controlled whole power, and the king was very weak originally in the medieval time. The characteristic feature of the early modern is the rise of nationalist state, nation state, which were ruled by one absolutist monarch. उसने धीरे धीरे पावर अपने हाथ में हथिया ली. How he could do that? He had to create, first of all, bureaucracy to collect the revenue, and secondly, he had to create army. And for that, he needed money. Money came by his support to mercantile people from their external things. तो इसलिए यहाँ पे mercantile people needed support of the king to get charter and protection and concessions and all those things. So दोनों का यहाँ पे मिली भगत थी. It's a win-win thing for both of them, and because of that, ultimately we have the rise of the absolutist monarch at the expense of the power of church and aristocracy. There is one more point which I had not mentioned earlier, but let me talk about it. Technological change also played some role in this transition. We have the emergence of artillery. जब artillery शुरू होती है, it's very costly, it's high tech, it's very powerful, it is very destructive. So the artillery becomes a tool in the hand of a very powerful person, that is the monarch. तो उनको जो ट्रूप्स सप्लाई करते थे सोल्जर्स की, भाई हमारे 1000 सैनिक ले जाओ, हमारे 5000 ले जाओ, उनकी तो इम्पोर्टेंस कम हो गई. द किंग्स डिपेंडेंस on the feudal lords reduced because now the king has access to artillery. So ये चलो, so rise of artillery also led to emergence of strong monarch. But that is one thing. My point is that monarchy is emerging and mercantile class is emerging. That is the characteristics of the early modern. A point comes where the middle class starts asking for more and more power, एंड मोनार्की फील्स थ्रेटन कि भाई इससे अधिक पावर देंगे तो दिक्कत हो जाएगी. When middle class gets angry, it puts up the demands on the form of charter, and those demands are called as enlightenment. कि हमारे ये अधिकार होने चाहिए, we have to get this at least right, ये नहीं बदलो वो बदलो जो कुछ है, limit your power. The king got frustrated, king got angry, then he sided with his old friends. He understood ultimately कि भाई एक ही थाली के चट्टे बट्टे कौन है, चर्च, एरिस्टोक्रेसी, मोनार्की. इनको साथ में रहेंगे तो साथ में रहेंगे वरना डूब जाएंगे. The king, there is realignment of the class interest in the 18th century. The king now shifts the side away from the middle class and goes towards church and aristocracy. And then the tussle is bound to happen. Ideas की बात कितने साल करोगे? From 1680s to 1780s, for one entire century, for 3 generations. The middle class talked about ideas. कुछ तो करो, अमेरिका में हो गया. And then the revolution happens in France. But the revolution does not happen only because of ideas. It is much more complicated than that, and therefore we have to go into the causes of the revolution in detail. And as such, understand one thing very well. In the old UPSC, the questions used to be 60 markers. 60 मार्क के सवाल आते तो उसमें they could very easily ask you a question, enlist the causes of the French Revolution, and then you would write essay, long essay. वो जमाना चला गया. Now they ask smaller questions of 10 markers, 15 markers, etc. And in that they cannot ask you to enlist all the causes, rarely if at all possible, because you cannot do justice. अगर पूछे तो हम justice कर लेंगे, सिकुड़ के आंसर लिख देंगे, but that is no more the type of question. Now out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions, 5 causes you may have, they pick up one single cause and ask you analyze that cause. How far that was the true cause, how far that was the substantive cause, what are the limitations of that cause, क्या सच में वो cause था भी या नहीं था. So you should be able to analyze those 4 or 5 causes and be able to write a 10 or 15 marker on each cause individually. Look at the nature of question. And that too, amongst all these causes, सबसे important debate जो है, which we have actually technically seen in some format earlier, I will upgrade it to next level this time, the relationship between the ideas and revolution. How much of it was because of the enlightenment thought? Thinkers का role क्या था and thoughts का role क्या था? या फिर revolution was gonna happen anyway? Ideas just give it a shape and direction. सवाल या फिर ideas had no role to play, ideas नहीं भी होते, फिर भी revolution होना ही था, बल आज नहीं तो कल होता. Where do you stand? It's a very old philosophical debate, matter versus mind. यही तो है, material cause versus ideological cause. Wait a second, we have seen the cause in the case of American Revolution as well. That is a kind of binary that comes with the philosophical understanding. We'll keep seeing that continuously throughout our course. Okay, let us look at the questions first to get some amount of idea. Yes. क्या नया खिलौना बन गया आपको? ठीक है. Look at the first basket of causes. Questions. It is causes. I have put them into 2 parts. The first part is the questions which are only and only about the relative role of the philosophers and enlightenment thought. The writings of the philosophers had a tremendous influence on the minds of the people and created a revolutionary awakening in their minds and formed the intellectual creed of the French Revolution. Comment. So, ideas की वजह से revolution हुई. What mattered in 1789 and what made men revolutionary almost in spite of themselves was the whole revolutionary situation, and in producing that situation the work of philosophers played no very important role. उनकी कोई अहमियत नहीं थी कि पूरा माहौल ही ऐसे बन गया था. तो exactly question हो गया. Then you go to next question. French political writers of the 18th century were influenced by Locke and also by curious contrast which they perceived between the government of his country and their own. So we know Montesquieu is asking about all these things. Actually, this question could have been put into Enlightenment more than the French Revolution, right? But anyway, if monarchical misrule ignited the French Revolution, lofty ideas both inspired and sustained it. Comment. So this is asking about a balance. On one side you have the situation, on the other you have the ideas. So in some other question, for example, this question of 1985 20 marker, it was revolutionary situation and not the ideas, and it's a comment type question. So in the conclusion, अगर ये सवाल आज पूछा जाए, तो what would be your conclusion? This question, ये question इस question के आंसर का conclusion है, right? It's very logical. The same question was repeated once more in 2022. The writings of the philosophers had a tremendous influence. Again, the question repeated. No event as encompassing as the French Revolution occurs in the intellectual vacuum. तो इसके बिना तो revolution हो ही नहीं सकती. इसका मतलब है the role of philosophers is not only supportive, it is fundamental. उसके बिना कैसे revolution होगी? Then you have to comment. The connection between the philosophers' ideas and the outbreak of the French Revolution is somewhat remote and indirect. Again, ulta question. अब बताओ. He is not saying it is not there, he is saying it is remote and indirect. So in this question, intellectual creed of the French Revolution, in this question कहाँ गया? No role to, no very important role to play. यहाँ पे तो बोले उनका कोई रोल ज़्यादा है ही नहीं. यहाँ पे बोले रोल है, बट वो क्या है? Remote and indirect. Then critically examine the statement that the French Revolution was not caused by the French philosophers but by the conditions of national life and by mistakes of the government. So conditions of national life and mistakes of the government is a part of the revolutionary situation. वही सवाल दोबारा पूछा है. So you have all these questions coming again and again on the relative role of philosopher. एक तीन, we have found the तीन categories. Three possible use cases based on the previous year question. On one side, it is the fundamental rule, इसके बिना काम ही नहीं होता. On the other extreme, we have no role at all to play. उनके बिना सब कुछ होता, उनकी जरूरत ही नहीं थी. And in between, there is some role, but the role is indirect. Role is as a catalyst. We have got three positions, and a question may come from any of these three positions. You should be able to justify and counter all of them. Humanities जो होती है ना, it's not science. ये समझो. अगर आप में से कोई आता है from engineering background, understand that there is no single answer to one single fact. It is always perspectives. You should be okay with having different answers, and within different answer taking different stance depending on the question. जैसे जैनिज्म में कहा जाता है अनेकांतवाद, it is अनेकांतवाद. Depending on the question, you touch this part of the elephant or that part of the elephant. आपकी इच्छा. ठीक है. And then we'll read the other questions also. Let us look at the causes first. Other factor. What were the ideals of the French Revolution of 1789? How far is it correct to say that it overthrew mercantilism and surviving relics of feudalism and contributed to the political supremacy of the middle class? It's a good question. Ideas क्या थे and उसने क्या कैसे achieve किया? Critical question. To some extent, the American War of Independence inspired the French Revolution. Now you go to the other cause altogether. This question is very easy. We have already done that. In our notes of the American Revolution, we have seen all the 4 points also. But when you learn the French Revolution, you give it entire framework. Additionally, उसमें वो 4 point लगा देंगे तो आंसर बन जाएगा. The multiple contradictions that quickly undermined the new edifice had been expressed even before the meeting of the States General in France. The internal conflict among states had manifested itself. Critically examined. So we have to talk about States General. We'll see that today only. The causes of the French Revolution of 1789 included both long-term and structural factors as well as more immediate events. So long-term structural factor is something which you go by the Marxist analysis. Structural मतलब यहाँ पे in this context Marxist analysis, because Marxist people think in terms of class structure. Structural के अलग मतलब भी होते हैं. Marxism is not the only structural perspective, but it is a very strong structural perspective, and for us in history optional, it is the only structural perspective. Other structural thinkers are not required for us. and as well as more immediate events. So long term क्या है, short term क्या है, बता दो. Other questions we shall see later on. So let us begin our lecture. I hope you have got a good idea of type of questions. As usual, let us begin with some amounts of quotations. The first quote that I have put is, "It was the best of the times, it was the worst of the times." This is the very first line from a very great book of Charles Dickens, The Two Cities, The Tale of Two Cities. पहला पैराग्राफ ही पढ़ोगे ना, मजा आ जाएगा. It was the best of the times, it was the worst of the times. It was the winter of and despair and hope, something something चलता रहता है वो. He plays among binary. वो गाड़ी का प्रवास चल रहा है, पेरिस टू लंदन, वो सब चीजें. So it's a very apt statement. The story also takes place in its way. Very apt statement. Or what was French? The best and worst at the same time. Extremes. So there is obviously therefore no doubt that even today it evokes extreme reactions from people. कि अच्छा है कि बुरा है. It is both at the same time. Then liberty, equality and fraternity and death. Because there came a time in the duration of French Revolution in 1791-92 when it was the most radical phase, the reign of terror. And in that radical phase, हजारों हजारों लोगों को ऐसे ही मार दिया. कैसे मारा? गियोटिन, सरकट, कलम करके. In the name of revolution. It's not a joke. In the name of revolution, in the name of people, they formed a committee of public safety नाम की कमेटी बनाई थी पब्लिक की सेफ्टी के लिए, and that committee executed as many public as it can. That was the irony of the committee of public safety. We have the various estimates, 16,000, 17,000, 20,000. एक आदमी ने सबको मार दिया. And that was the bloodiest phase of revolution. It was so easy. बैठे बैठे he is anti-revolutionary, चलो इसको सर कलम कर दो. वो गलत है, वो गद्दार है, सर कलम कर दो. सर राजा का सर कलम किया. Once you assassinate, once you execute the king, regicide, आपके उसके बाद आप किसको भी मार सकते हो. तो शहर के लोग पकड़ पकड़ के मारे गए. So liberty, equality, fraternity and death. So this is, you find Maximilian Robespierre, who was the topmost person who designed that executions. And there was a context. Even today, you will find a big amount of people, substantial number of people who support those executions as necessary evil. तो हम वो भी देखेंगे. Then you go to Fidel Castro. He comes from a different century altogether, but the statement is very important. A revolution is a struggle between the future and the past. It's a very romantic vision. Once you juxtapose future versus past, it is not wrong, it is true. But then any opposition becomes the representative of past and therefore worthy of execution. Khatam kar do isko. So violence is ingrained in revolution. There is no peaceful revolution, at least in this context. And then you have Hannah Arendt, a great political thinker of 20th century. She says, in revolutions, the first victor is the one who seizes the imagination of the future. तो एक आपको दिशा दिखाता है, पहले बात वो आपको ले जाए, बट इट्स फर्स्ट विक्टर, नॉट द लास्ट विक्टर. ये समझो. इन माय मदर टंग देयर इज अ ट्रांसलेशन ऑफ सम इंग्लिश प्रोवर्ब, बट आई डोंट नो द ओरिजिनल इंग्लिश प्रोवर्ब. तो मराठी में हम कहते हैं, क्रांति आपल्या पिल्लांना खाते. Revolution devours its own children. That is perhaps the loose translation, and that is very true. The generation which created the revolution, almost everybody somehow got devoured by the revolution itself. It's not that easy. So it is a very dangerous phase which we are starting, but it is very fundamental also. It has actually, our syllabus technically starts from the year 1789. If you want to pick up one date in the history of the world where the modern era begins, that is 1789. उसके पहले ideas आते गए. Execution of the ideas for the first time in massive scale, in irreversible way, starts happening from 1789. It is still ongoing. So it is the beginning of modern world. कहाँ से? 1789. That is the significance. So anyway, without much further ado, let us start. आपके handouts यहाँ पे. So by the end of the 18th century, Europe had undergone profound change under the influence of Enlightenment. Philosophers and artists promoted reasoning and human freedom over tradition and religion. Enlightenment is generally seen as anti-tradition. The rise of a middle class and availability of printed material encouraged political awareness, and the American Revolution had turned the formal English colony into an independent republic. So this is all, इसको बोलते हैं भूमिका बांधना. तो ये background बन गई. Yet, this is the story now. Yet, if you go, अरे यार, ये joke हो गया. Slowly, नाराज हो जाते हैं वरना. Okay. Yet, France, one of the largest and richest European countries, was still governed by, it is not wrong spelling, in French, they write it like this only, it is not ancient, because ancient का मतलब होता है medieval से पहले, before medieval, but when we say here ancient regime, it does not mean ancient era की regime, it means the regime that existed in the early modern era. It's actually the medieval structure, ancient regime. I don't know the French, but anyway, a three-level rigid social class system. We'll see that in detail in some time. The French Revolution was a major landmark which challenged the ancient regime and led to the formation of a new republic. It established the power and prestige of the middle class parallel to the monarchy, nobility, and church. This phenomenon did not remain restricted to France only. Rather, it proved to be a widespread upheaval which shook all the institutions in other parts of Europe as well. Thus, the French Revolution gave a definite shape to the transitional process from the Middle Age into the modern age, which began with the Renaissance in the European history. The process of the early modern starts with Renaissance and ends with the beginning of French Revolution, and from 1789 we have the beginning of modern era. Okay. Now, this year 1789 is important for, it is a watershed year for a couple of reasons. One reason is we have the beginning of French Revolution, but what happened in other part of the world in 1789? कोई बताएगा? US Constitution. Ultimately, US Constitution was passed. It got applied. So US Constitution came into existence in the very same year in which the French Revolution begins. So 1789 becomes a very important landmark for both the old world and the new world in the march towards modern age. That is one point. Secondly, there are, because of the complexities of early modern, there were some structural questions which arose about the social relationship between different classes. For example, the relationship between the monarchy, you have aristocracy, you have middle class, and lower class. Now, of all these four equations, इसका तो चलो हमारे काम का है नहीं और ये तो उनका स्ट्रगल से हमारे कोई मतलब भी नहीं है, so I will not go into this. So 1, 2, चलो इसको ऐड कर लिए थे 3 and 4. Of all these four equations, the 1, the 2 and the 3 were finally resolved by French Revolution. What should be the basis of the relationship? What kind of relationship should exist between monarchy and aristocracy, aristocracy and middle class and monarchy? It was ultimately resolved by French Revolution. One question which was not resolved, that is question number 4, middle class versus lower class. That question rather started to emerge during and after French Revolution. It was ultimately technically resolved by Russian Revolution. तो ये हो गया उसका context. So look at the causes. We will go in with the causes one by one. The very first cause is the social cause. You see, this is a very complicated, it is a cataclysmic event and it is a crisis in French society, polity, economy, society, culture, everywhere, that led to the beginning of revolution. So when we discuss that French crisis, we have to unpack it into all its segments one by one and see the crisis happening in every part. The first unpacking is in the case of social segment. Okay. So social division in the early modern France, that is ancien regime. Sometimes on the top of E they add a diacritic or a phonetic mark, but हम उतना नहीं जाएंगे, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. So let's start with the first point. So the medieval and early modern social structure in entire Europe, not only in France, in entire Europe, was dependent on something called as orders, or as we call them, the estates of the realm. realm मतलब है दुनिया, और स्टेट मतलब इसके कौन से ग्रुप्स बने हुए हैं. आपका ग्रुप एक है, मेरा ग्रुप एक है, तो ईच ग्रुप इज कॉल्ड स्टेट, and the structure of that realm or the states of the realm or social orders or hierarchy was different in different parts of Europe. It is not uniform across Europe. For example, if you go to Britain, you have the two state system. वहाँ पे सोसाइटी के दो टुकड़े हैं, दो भाग है, अपर क्लास, लोअर क्लास. The two state system with nobility and clergy, that is the aristocracy and the church clubbed into one, that is called lordly state, and then commons, बाकी सब सामान्य जनता, जो हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी कहते हैं सामान्य मानवी, बाकी सारे सामान्य मानवी into the second state. And now these structures which were inherited from the medieval to early modern, when you start entering into modern phase, the structures start evolving. British are always going for evolutionary and not revolutionary change. So they modify their existing structure. That is why from the nobility and clergy you have the emergence of House of Lords, and from the commons you have emergence of House of Commons. So समाज के दो अंग थे जिससे उनके पार्लियामेंट के दो अंग बन गए, अपर एंड लोअर चेंबर. So it was a process. It happened generally through evolutionary structure. तो वहाँ पे इतना rapid rupture नहीं आता. If you go to France, you have something called an ancien regime. It has three states. एक तो ऊपर राजा बैठा ही है, there is a king who has divine right, वो अलग. Then you have the first state which is composed of the clergy, the church, the people in the church. They are state number one. Then you have state number two, that is the aristocracy or nobility. And then you have the third state which contains everybody else, the peasant, the craftsman, the artist, the bourgeoisie, everybody is in put together into third state. So you have three state system in France. In some other countries, you had four states like Russia and Sweden also, where the lowest people and other people were put in fourth state. So we have in different parts of Europe different states. Our concern for our syllabus, for our topic today, is only French ancien regime. Okay? That is one point. Now, when you start moving towards modern time, economy is changing because of mercantilism and everything. The society also has to change. If the society doesn't change, only economic changes, then there is tussle. In case of Britain, with economy, society also gradually kept evolving. तो उनके दो orders के अंदर से ही दो parliament के उनके chambers बन गए. But in case of France, it did not happen. So much so, 200-300 साल हो गए. कॉफी पियोगे? सच बताओ, शुरू कर दो यार कॉफी ना मेरे लिए. ठीक है. तो in case of France, economy changed, but the social structure did not change. It became, as we call it, anachronistic. मतलब समय बीत चुका है फिर भी चल रहा है, एनाक्रोनिस्टिक. इसका समय का कोई समय के परे चीज है या बेकार चीज है. एंड ये स्टडी किसने किया है? वी हैव अ वेरी फेमस अ मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियन कॉल्ड जॉर्ज लेफेब्रे. यार बी पहले की वी पहले मैं खुद भूल जाता हूँ बार बार. आई डोंट नो फ्रेंच. Lefebvre. Lefebvre. So he is a very important Marxist historian whose name we shall use again and again. So the analysis that I shall be doing in some time for the study of society is based on his analysis. Okay. Now let us understand the analysis. The first and the second state enjoyed various economic and social privileges. The first and second, first mane clergy, second mane nobility. They had various privileges. For example, and the French political system was aristocratic in nature. All the high offices under the state were monopolized by the nobles and clergymen. उनके पास ही सारी सत्ता थी, उनके पास सारी power थी, along with the king. राजा ऊपर बैठा है. King always claims that he has divine rights and he has created these things. So king is on top of all these three. वो ऊपर है. But then you have these two people who had monopolized all the power over centuries originally. Within that, you let us study them one by one. The first state is composed of church and the class of clergy. The population was hardly 1 or 1.5%. पूरे देश में उनकी आबादी बस 1-1.5% है, but they control more than 10% of land. So they have excessive control over land, and not only land, land income. They, because of that, whoever works on the land also pays taxes to them. So tax church को भी जाता है, not only to government. And then they are themselves exempted from other taxes. So they have something called as fiscal immunity. आपको कोई टैक्स नहीं भरना है, आपको एंजॉय करना है. So that's a problem. Fiscal immunity. Now understand, this clergy appears to be one single social class, but as I said, Lefebvre shows very statistically to us that ये three class system actually three order system नहीं है. There are three orders: clergy, nobility and commoners, but the orders within themselves are not homogeneous. हर order के अंदर, within every order, the class structure is emerging. There is diversity, differences and this opposing interest also within each order. Take for example clergy. Clergy, not all of them are homogeneous. There is upper clergy and there is lower clergy. The upper clergy, nobody is born in clergy. समझो पहले तो clergy by default तो monk होता है जो शादी करता ही नहीं है. तो मैं 5 पुश्तों से मैं पादरी हूँ ऐसे कोई बोल ही नहीं सकता. You have to be initiated into the clergy. So no clergy came with birthright. People became clergy. But who became clergy? They must come from some other order, some other estate, either second or third. तभी तो बनेंगे clergy वो. So up higher clergy, the upper clergy came from the aristocratic class. और जो चर्च की हायरार्की जो पूरी है, उस हायरार्की में सबसे नीचे आता है पैरिश. पैरिश लोकल एरिया जहाँ का चर्च होगा, उसका जो पादरी फादर होगा वो एकदम सबसे छोटा आदमी, प्यादा है वो. एंड इन द हायरार्की यू गो ultimately to level of pope, but at the national level you have archbishop. So in France we have 137 archbishops. सबसे top level पे वो है. Then you have bishops and likewise in the bottom you have parish. So the bishops and archbishops, जो higher clergy है, वो आती कहाँ से? It comes from aristocracy. And they bring their privileges with them. They are more powerful. They control everything. They call the shots. They are rich. But in the case, the actual function is performed in the day-to-day life with the people. Mass कौन करेगा, भाषण कौन देगा, लोगों के साथ उनके problems कौन solve करेगा, confessions कौन लेगा? It is lower clergy. Lower clergy came from the third stage. They did not have access to the riches. They did not get huge salary, and they were always dissatisfied. But they were the true men of religion. The higher clergy was more powerful, had more privileges, but it did not bother. It was corrupt. So within the clergy class, you have a class difference emerging. It is important to understand that. Then you go to the second state. The second state is of aristocracy. Here, owning vast land, collecting taxes, free gifts, and corvée from peasants. Their population was around 1% again or 2% maximum, but they control more than 15% of the nation's resources. Since they control vast tracts of land, they dominated the countryside. अब ये हो गई nobility. So they also are very few in number, but they also are a privileged class. They control land, not only land, they get lot of, there is a term for that called as seigneurial dues. So I discussed this term in the very first or second lecture, maybe when we discussed the ancient medieval time. Seigneurial, it's a typical feudal era term कि आप बस हमारे जमींदार हो तो आपको हम कुछ ना कुछ सेवा करेंगे. जैसे हमारे यहाँ भी इन ब्रिटिश एरा, इवन इन ब्रिटिश एरा, बस कोई जमींदार है, ठेकेदार है, या फिर हमारे पटेल, पाटिल, इनामदार, जो कुछ आपको कहना है, मतलब दे यूज्ड टू बी द पीपल हु यूज्ड टू होल्ड पावर एंड लूट अदर पीपल. तो सॉरी, आपको नहीं बोल रहा हूँ लेकिन तो एनीवे, सो इन ब्रिटिश एरा आल्सो वी हैव अ टैक्स कॉल्ड एज हाथियाना एंड मोटराना. कि हमारे लाड साहब तो नहीं कहेंगे, हमारे ये जो साहब है, जमींदार साहब जो है, उनके हाथी है. हाथी पालना आसान बात नहीं होती, उसको बहुत पैसे चाहिए, तो हाथियाना टैक्स. तो आसपास के लोग हाथी के चारे के लिए टैक्स देंगे. देखिए मोटराना, व्हेन हाथी वेंट बाय एंड मोटर केम, मोटर इज ऑल्सो वेरी कॉस्टली, उसका फ्यूल का पैसा कौन देगा? तो जमींदार वुड स्टार्ट न्यू टैक्स, मोटराना टैक्स. तो गांव का गरीब मजदूर के टैक्स भर रहा है क्योंकि उनको गाड़ी में बैठना है. So this is a seigneurial due. Same thing happened in Europe in that time, that if you are a peasant, you have to do free labor, corvée, बेगार. You have to, आपके यहाँ में जो कुछ उपज होगी उनको जाके देनी है, उसका कुछ गिफ्ट, दूध है, फल है, जो कुछ. इफ यू वांट टू, आपको कोई आटे की चक्की इस्तेमाल करनी है, इफ यू वांट टू ग्राइंड योर ओन कॉर्न, यू हैव टू गो टू द, उसकी जो क्या होगी, मिल होगी ऑफ द feudal lord only, where you will be charged very high. You can't go to any other cheaper place. So you have to pay all these dues either in money or in kind or in work. That is called seigneurial dues. तो वो वसूल कर रहे हो. अब देखो होता क्या है ना, ड्यूज देना बुरी बात नहीं है, प्रोवाइडेड the person who is getting the dues is also serving some function for society. जैसे एक जमाने में हमारे यहाँ एंशियंट इंडिया में हम लैंड ग्रांट देते, उसका कुछ पर्पस था कि वही विद्या मार्केट में नहीं मिलती. पीपल हु फॉलो विद्या, what will they do if they don't get to eat? So you have to, market economy cannot solve the problem, so you have to give patronage. कि आप वेद पढ़ रहे हो, आपके लिए 4 गांव की जमीन दे चुकी है, आप पढ़ो आराम से, आपका पढ़ना हमारे लिए जरूरी है, समाज के लिए जरूरी है, हमें काम आएगा. That is how you create land grant. It will sustain the scholarship. That is one example. It also was abused. That's a different story. But ideally, that's a simple thing. Buddhist Sanghas got huge. Sangha became richest of the places in the world. क्यों? क्योंकि Sangha was wanted by everybody. So similarly, here also dues in themselves are not bad. लेकिन problem कब आता है? If the feudal lord is not serving any function. There came a point of time in the development of French history where the monarch concentrated all the power in his hand. It became absolutist monarch. From the medieval through the early modern, the 200 years history is the history of the rise of absolutist state. It means इनके power धीरे धीरे कम हो रहा है. The feudal lords do not have any function, any work, any role to play in the power structure. Power सारी चली गई, but they still continue enjoying the seigneurial dues. क्यों भाई? अब तेरा क्या काम है समाज में? जाके काम कर, मेरी तरह टैक्स भर? नहीं, हमारे पुरखे बड़े काम कर, देश की सेवा करी, हमें बैठ के खाना है आज. तो that was the point. So their role, the role of the feudal lords, aristocracy, has become anomalous. The functions had ceased to exist, but the taxation continued. That is the anomaly that had crept into French society. Now within feudal lords also, within the second estate, again you have internal stratification. You have nobility of sword and nobility of robe. The people who came from the first part, nobility of sword, वो ऐसे लोग थे, they would count their generations since the medieval time. 20 generations, 15 generations, 15, 20 generations हम इस शैटो में रह रहे हैं. हमने एक जमाने में 500 साल पहले पुरखों ने बड़ा काम किया था, हर एक का नाम. तो the old families. In case of India, we don't get to see them more. There are very few of them because they were willfully destroyed by British. गांव गांव जाके तोप लगा के बंगले गिरा दिए, कोठियां तोड़ दी, फैमिली खत्म कर दी कि हमारे यहाँ वी डोंट हैव डायरेक्ट, हमारे यहाँ कोई मिलता है कि मैं मौर्य का वंशज हूँ, गुप्ता का वंशज हूँ. There are a few families, there are locally they are, but they are relatively very few considering the size and scale of India. But in Europe at that time there were quite a few of them. हर 100-200 में आपको 4 आदमी मिलेंगे कि 400 साल पुरानी हमारी फैमिली है. So they were खानदानी, so nobility of sword, but there was nobility of robe also. ये robe कौन थे? The people who were in the government offices who gradually get promoted. प्रमोट होके पहुंचे फिर राजा ने कहा भाई तू आज से जमींदार बन जा. So the promoted aristocracy by the king. There were also a system of venality. In this system of venality, you can go and purchase the office. अगर आप बहुत बड़े बिजनेसमैन बन गए, you are a capitalist, you are a bourgeois, you earn huge amount of money, you just give the money and buy the office. अब मुझे खिताब मिल गया, राय बहादुर, दीवान बहादुर, खरीद लिया मैंने, क्या दिक्कत है, पैसे है. So there are some new people also. So you have some old people and new people. But even amongst the old people, not everybody is equally rich and powerful and living luxurious life. Those people who are close to Paris, close to the court, close to monarchy, they have land income as well as they get income from the government patronage. उनकी जिंदगी बड़े अय्याशी में चल रही है. But the people who are in countryside, far away from the capital, their income is dwindling. They are not that rich, and they are rather jealous कि भाई हमारे और आप में स्टेटस में क्या डिफरेंस है. हमारा गांव एक है, जात एक है, आप अमीर हम गरीब, ये कैसे चलेगा, हमारी कोई खुददारी है कि नहीं. So that was the kind of attitude of those people. Those people needed money, शर्मसार थे, जमीन से पैसे नहीं आते थे, बैठ के खा नहीं पाते थे. So they are the ones who sometimes got into matrimonial alliance with bourgeoisie. गांव में कोई बड़ा बिजनेसमैन आया है, बेटी का ब्याह वहीं पे कर दो यार, भले हमारे खानदान का नहीं है तो क्या हुआ, अमीर तो है, पैसे तो आएंगे. They used to take the loans. They used to somehow hobnob with the newly rising people, but they used to feel कि हम निचले लोग हो गए, अब हमारी नहीं रही. So even within the aristocratic class, because of the change in the class structure, you have stratification, rich aristocracy and lower aristocracy. समझ में आ रहा है? पक्का? So my point to tell you is only two things. Firstly, the first two classes are having privileges, undue privileges. They control lots of things, but they don't contribute. They are unproductive classes to a large extent. And secondly, they have become anomalous. That the function they used to perform in the medieval time, in the early modern, they do not perform it anymore. ठीक है? थोड़ा स्लो चल रहा है कहानी आज, फिर बढ़ा दो थोड़ा सा, फिर बढ़ाओ थोड़ा सा. मैडम आप बताइए, आप जैसे कहेंगे वैसा करेंगे. ठीक है, मतलब बढ़ाए ना बढ़ाए, बढ़ाओ. ठीक है. So then you come to the third state. Now the third state is actually also again a mixed state. It has all the commoners, which includes both middle class and lower class. So let's look at the middle class first. It was the most important class, bourgeoisie class. As I said, the Borg word comes from the town. People of town, those who are in business, those who are part of new economy. They are now economically rich. They are rising economic power, but they don't have social status. New money. आपका खानदान तो नहीं है, वो क्या करोगे? So they used to get frustrated कि भाई ये बात, हम सारा टैक्स पे करेंगे, हम educated, we are educated, we are paying tax, we have economic power, we are aware of the problems and still we don't get anything in return. हमारी इज्जत नहीं है समाज में. So they are the ones who are angry. They are the ones who create enlightenment. They are the ones who are asking for the rights now. So rich peasant class, intellectuals, teachers, merchants, etc. was highly dissatisfied with its position as its economic status largely improved, but it was socially deprived. In France, there was a major contradiction between economically effective class and socially effective class. So the bourgeoisie was economically effective, and the first two states were socially effective. It's a statement given by David Thompson. It's a very important statement. That was their source of anger. They were educated and awakened, although the burden of the taxes on them was quite less relatively compared to the peasants and other poorer sections of society. The level of discontent was most intense. It was this middle class that was in the forefront of the French Revolution, at least during the initial phase. It is very easy. होता क्या है ना, if this middle class is at the forefront of the French Revolution, was it the same thing happening in other parts of Europe? यूरोप में और जगह मिडिल क्लास नहीं था? बिल्कुल था. In every part of Europe there was a middle class. In every part of Europe there was some problem also. Middle class actually in France was relatively much better than the middle class in other parts of Europe. यहाँ की middle class was not गरीब, not oppressed. It was actually enjoying a better social standing, not social, better economic standing compared to the other European countries. But there were two problems. Firstly, it was more aware of its problems because of the Enlightenment. And secondly, the distinction between its economic status and social status was very high. Socially they had no status, economically they had every status. So वो contrast जो है ना, that played a lot, and because they were educated, they felt it intensely. Now you go to the next class, that is a lower class. It is the 95% or more than that of entire population. ये है आम जनता, शहरों में हो या गांव में. And they are the ones who are actually producing everything. They are the ones who are paying all the taxes. Taxes for what? For fighting those useless wars. France has been fighting useless wars for over two centuries now. Every decade there is some major war going on. Who is funding all the wars? Garib Kisan, the poor peasant. And they are paying different taxes, not to the king and the feudal lords, but also to the church. Different dues. For example, you have tele. I don't know how to pronounce the word in French, but let us call it tele. It's a land tax. You have gabel, salt tax. You have tithe to the church. Even the church gets its own tax. We have gift to feudal dues, corvée, free labor. All these things are done. Aadmi pareshan. मैं क्या करूं? And no power. And this money is spent. So we have a very famous cartoon like this. We find multiple such cartoons कि बेचारा किसान बूढ़ा है, उसके कंधे पे बैठे है, एक सामने बैठा है जो गले में क्रॉस है. So there is a Christian father and then there is aristocrat. उसके पीठ पे बैठे हुए हैं, दुनिया चला रहा आदमी नीचे. So it's a typical class structure. So one major reason of the French Revolution was the dissatisfaction of the members of the third estate who wanted a more equal distribution of wealth, power and prestige. Is it clear? Now I have to add one more point here, the differential understanding. Therefore, even in the third estate, there is no uniformity. There is a class difference even within third estate. Middle class bhi hai, lower class bhi hai. And the demands, the objectives of both of them are different. If you are middle class, you already have money, you have property. What do you want? Power. So how do you get it? You ask for reforms. So what kind of reforms? For example, you need constitutional monarchy, you need right to property. अगर आप already गरीब किसान हो, if you are a poor peasant, and you not only need power, you need economic improvement also. The demands of the lower class inside the third estate are generally more radical than the demands of the middle class. But the problem at this juncture in history is that the middle class is educated, aware and able to provide leadership. Lower class is not educated. Lower class knows the problem but is not able to articulate them. Lower class has no its own leadership. So lower class is dependent on the leadership of the middle class कि भाई आप मेरे बड़े भैया हो, कुछ करिए हमारे लिए भी, हम आपका पूरा सपोर्ट करेंगे. बड़े भैया बड़े नालायक है. He takes the support of the lower class as a muscle power. कि बड़े भैया भी तो कमजोर है. He cannot go to the king and say कि power दो. He needs muscle power. Muscle power comes from lower class. Middle class, with the help of lower class muscle power, you will see that very soon, takes all the advantages, ultimately rejects the lower class. चलो मेरा काम हो गया. The lower class gets angry, and that resolution is not happening in French Revolution. That happens in Russian Revolution. Ultimately, okay. But anyway, so this is about the class analysis. You will see very easily the objectives that were achieved in French Revolution at every stage. For example, on the night of 4th of August, on the day of 26th of August, in the Constitution, we shall see three important benchmarks, landmarks, events. In each of these three events, the objectives of the lower classes were sidelined and of middle classes were clinched. There you know कि भाई class analysis बहुत जरूरी है यहाँ. So that is about the social factors. It is very important, so I had to cover it in detail. Then you go to economic factors. They are very easy. They are very interesting also. So the French economy continued to be in the medieval state because even during 1780s there was no trace of industrial revolution in France. In Britain, it had already started. Gradually, since 1750s and 60s, there was already a march towards French industrial revolution. In France, it did not happen. The old systems continued. So agriculture, most of the land was owned by the church and the feudal lords who were not improving landlords. Unlike Britain, where you had gentlemanly capitalism and yeoman, यहाँ पे नहीं था. In case of there was no large peasant proprietors who want to improve the agriculture. Peasants were heavily burdened with taxes. We have already seen. Industries, they were primarily handicraft based. Luxury, France generally used to export luxury items and not the items of daily use of articles of daily use, not that much, and the production was very low. Productivity was very low. And guilds enjoyed monopolistic control. Guild used to control how much production to take place, who will produce, at what price it will be sold. So there is no competitive economy. It's all medieval. I'm not indicating by any way that France is a poor country. No. France is a very rich country at that. It is, when I say it is backward, I mean structurally, institutionally and distribution wise it is backward. But taking aggregate as a whole, बहुत अमीर कंट्री है वो, पैसे की कमी नहीं है उनके. ठीक. I think we have some comment. Let us see the comment. Can't French society be termed as a four-state system by bifurcating third state into middle and lower class? So if we don't create states like that, state is not the term given by you and me or by historians कि चलो इसको state कहा जाए. ऐसे states are the socially and created structures that are identified even at that time. People knew कि I belong to first state, I belong to second state, I belong to, लोगों के मन में था, लोगों को जानते थे, उनका नाम था. The states used to have their voting power, states used to have their assembly, उनके संगठन बने हुए थे. तो states हम नहीं बनाते आज के. It is not a tool of analysis, it's a social structural institution that existed at that time. ठीक है. I hope it is clarified. Okay. So let us move on. Industries were therefore, then one important thing, overall there was backwardness, that is okay. Secondly, it was still rich, that is also okay. Thirdly, just in 1780s especially, you start seeing the problems, that calamities, disaster and decline after growth. From 1730s to 1760s, from 20s, 30s to 60s, for 40-50 years, there is a continuous growth and growth and growth and growth. There is no debacle. There is no sliding back. The French economy is improving. As such, aggregate level, it's improving. But in 1770s onwards, you start seeing decline. The first reason is inflow of precious metal decreased, and there was a sort of depressionary situation in French economy. Precious metal, by that we here mean silver. Silver stopped coming, reduced rather, from the new world in Latin America. उसका वजह depression आया था. When there is depression, there is problem. But that was an old problem. Then the exact couple of years before the revolution, you have the crop failure. Climate change can do anything. There is hailstorm, then there is drought, crop failure. अनाज नहीं है, महंगा हुआ है खाना, गांव-गांव लोग भूखे भटक रहे. So you have, it led to famines, shortages and finally bread riots occurred within the outbreak of the revolution. तो शहर में लोग हुआ क्या? Because in the village side, countryside, you can't sustain. लोग शहर आ गए, हजारों लाखों लोग शहर में आ गए, काम ढूंढ रहे, काम ही नहीं है. So there is cityward migration of people looking for occupation. They don't get job. भूखे हैं. It's a hungry mob. That hungry mob, or we call it Parisian mob. Paris का mob है. जनता, आम जनता, had played a very significant role in giving direction to the French Revolution. अचानक से पेरिस शहर में इतने हजारों गरीब लोग कहाँ से आ गए जो गुंडागर्दी करने में उतर गए. मॉब राइट्स बहुत ज्यादा हो गए. क्यों? बिकॉज पूरे गांव गांव में वहां पे प्रॉब्लम्स है. देयर इज नो फूड एंड दैट इज वेरी स्टार्क. यू नो, पीपल यूज्ड टू गेट ब्रेड. उसके राइट्स तो होते थे. आफ्टर द राइट्स, वॉट एवर ब्रेड दे यूज्ड टू गेट, इट यूज्ड टू कंटेन अप टू 50% ऑफ सॉ डस्ट. सॉ डस्ट जानते हो क्या होता है? लकड़ी का भूसा जो होता है वो मिला देते थे मिलावट करके. ब्रेड का 50% वो भूसा खाते थे लोग. कि इतनी भूखमरी थी. उस समय एक बंगला बना हुआ है, द पैलेस ऑफ वर्साई. ह्यूज 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 पैलेस. इन द पैलेस वहां के लैके लोग जो काम करने वाले थे 15,000. बस स्टाफ है 15,000 का काम, नौकरों का वहां पे सफाई के लिए काम करने के लिए. और वहां पे मेरी एंटोनेट जो है वो राजा की पत्नी बैठी है. एंड इज वेरी फेमस सेइंग. वो कौन सी कहानी है? वो बोलती है, इफ दे कांट हैव ब्रेड लेट देम ईट द केक. क्योंकि शी इज नॉट एबल टू कनेक्ट विद द पुअर पीपल की समस्या. बोलते ब्रेड नहीं मिल रहा, भूखे हैं तो केक खा लेते. अरे भाई केक कैसे मिलेगा? बट शी हैज नॉट सेड दैट. टू बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट, द ओरिजिनल फ्रेंच लैंग्वेज टर्म इज अ डिफरेंट टर्म. इट डजंट ट्रांसलेट एज केक. बट वो इंग्लिश यूनिवर्स में, इन द इंग्लिश लिटरेचर, इंग्लिश हिस्ट्री, दैट वर्ड ट्रांसलेटेड एज केक हैज बिकम वेरी पॉपुलर. बट द emotion behind it is correct, that she was not able to empathize with the poor people. तो poor people also stopped empathizing with her. उसको सर काट दिया बाद में उन्होंने, अलग बात है. तो point है कि there was all these people who were looking for new job in the cities, bankruptcy of government and the failure of economic reforms. So we shall see that in detail in some time. But all this also had impact on middle class. Economic decline following a long period of prosperity created a deep psychological effect. Firstly, the interest of the aristocracy and middle class began to collide. Secondly, both these classes were unhappy with the monarchy. Now, let me give you a very fundamental idea. Economic cause का मतलब क्या होता है? If you are a Marxist, you would say that poverty जो होती है, जो for example, the lower class, poor people who are in the city looking for job, they are so aggrieved, they ultimately charge and they create revolution. It is not completely true. It is partly true. गरीबी की वजह से पेट में आग लगी है, इसलिए क्रांति की मशाल जलाना. That is not always the only reason. There is another way of economic reason, and that is actually the prosperity. So we have another historian from the 19th century. He wrote a book in 1856, The Old Regime and the Revolution. उसका नाम है Alexis de Tocqueville. I don't know how to pronounce the word. उनका नाम लिख देता हूँ यहाँ पे. Whatever the pronunciation में, Tocqueville. So what I want to say is how economic condition shapes your action depends on the way you look at it. There are two perspectives here. One is a Marxist perspective, where आपका oppression, गरीबी, भूखमरी इतनी होगी, you get angry and you carry revolution. So the indication of poverty and inequality and oppression is a direct intensity that comes out in revolution. That is one Marxist view. But Tocqueville says no. He rather says that there is a long period of prosperity, luxury, and then suddenly you become थोड़ा सा poor. प्रॉब्लम हो गया. तो जिसको आदत लगी हुई है अच्छा रहने की, उससे पैसे हटा दो, उससे सहन नहीं होगा. तो जो गरीबी के घाव होते हैं, जो पहले से अगर बचपन से है तो आप कुछ सहन कर भी लो, लेकिन जिंदगी में गरीबी नहीं देखी और अचानक से गरीब हो गए, भाई आदमी सुसाइड कर ले. इट हैपन्स. टेक फॉर एग्जांपल मेनी पीपल हु प्रिपेयर फॉर यूपीएससी, अपने अपने कॉलेज के स्कूल के टॉपर होते हैं, यहाँ के प्रीलिम क्लियर नहीं होती, लगता है अरे क्या पहाड़ आसमान. अरे भाई नॉर्मल चीज है यार. बट कभी जिंदगी में फेल्यूर देखा नहीं, व्हेन द फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम द फेल्यूर यू जस्ट सकम कि भाई मैं डिप्रेशन में चला गया, ये होता है ना, कॉमन चीज है. सो सेम थिंग हियर, टॉकीविले टॉक्स ऑफ टॉकीविले इफेक्ट. What he says is the reason of French Revolution in the economic sense is not the poverty, but rather the affluence for a long time and then sudden poverty. And that affluence actually reduced the resilience of people to absorb the poverty. समझ में आ रहा है? और वो गुस्सा हो गया. तो if you look at the absolute terms, in the absolute terms, the French society is not as poor as other European societies. यूरोप के बाकी कंट्री में समस्या और बुरी है. तो रिवोल्यूशन वहां पे क्यों नहीं होती? व्हाई नॉट इन ऑस्ट्रिया, व्हाई नॉट इन रशिया, व्हाई नॉट इन नेदरलैंड, व्हाई नॉट इन स्पेन? द कंडीशन देयर इज मच वर्स देन इन फ्रांस. द रीजन टॉकविले सेज इज दैट इट्स नॉट द पॉवर्टी, इट्स एक्चुअली 40-50 साल की प्रोग्रेस एंड देन सडन डिप. दैट इज वन मेजर रीजन. सो एबिलिटी टू सस्टेन दैट थिंग इज नाउ द सोशल फ्रस्ट्रेशन is very rapidly built if you have long period of prosperity and such economic downturn. तो गवर्नमेंट क्यों घबराती है डिप्रेशन से? समझो आप, डिप्रेशन हो जाए तो सरकार ही गिर जाए, सरकार ही नहीं निजाम गिर जाए. तो ये बात है. तो रिवोल्यूशन में सरकार नहीं गिरती, निजाम गिरता है. Tocqueville effect. We have other historians also if you want to cite. For example, you have Harlan Cleveland. He talks of J curve. Now, what is J curve? J curve is like this. So, or you are over here and you go here, तो आपको नहीं सहन होगा. अगर आप पहले से यहीं पे हो तो आपको सहन होगा. ठीक है, और सही बात भी एक किस्म से. So he says it is actually the revolution of rising expectations. The exact term used, revolution of rising expectations. So in today's sense, for example, we have a term called as relative deprivation. No, it may not be absolutely, you may not be absolutely as deprived as you think you are, but relatively compared to your earlier position, now you are down. So relative deprivation, why? So because your benchmark in mind is now very set very high. It's a evolution of rising expectations. Expectations are created by which? By what? Your own past and now the intellectual atmosphere of enlightenment both. ऐसे भी है and अकल भी है. तो अपेक्षा है, पूरी नहीं हो रही. सिंपल बात है. सो इकोनॉमिक कॉजेस में वी हैव द मार्क्सिस्ट आइडिया ऑल्सो एंड ऑल्सो द टॉकीविले इफेक्ट. ठीक है, इट इज नॉट वेरी डिफिकल्ट एट ऑल. बट इन द केस, so thus overall there was a dismal economic condition. Economic decline was not the cause of revolution, rather economic crisis that set in after a long period of growth was the cause of the revolution. ठीक है. Now you have to apply it class wise also. The initial torch bearer of the revolution was middle class, and for middle class this is the reason. But for the poor class, भुखमरी तो भुखमरी है, उनके लिए मार्क्सिस्ट आइडिया इज मोर एप्लीकेबल. But for the middle class, it is not the Marxist idea, but this idea that is more applicable. Okay. Let's go to the next part. The question about the ideological factor. Now, this question UPSC has asked multiple times, so we have to be able to answer it. It is a very critical topic, very important. Let us read the first line. Understand there are three types of, as I said, three types of impact. There is direct and significant impact. There is no significant impact, and in between you have indirect and remote impact. We should know all the three compartments, and based on the questions that is asked, we should be able to furnish our arguments. ठीक है. तो हम तीनों एक एक करके देखेंगे। द फर्स्ट वन इज डायरेक्ट इन्फ्लुएंस, क्या था? एन ऑल एनकम्पासिंग इवेंट लाइक फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन कैन नेवर अकर इन द कंडीशन ऑफ इंटेलेक्चुअल वैक्यूम। यूपीएससी स्टेटमेंट ओनली, एक्सप्लेन करो। The writings of the French scholars like Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, D'Alembert, Rousseau, etc. certainly contributed to the outbreak of the revolution. कैसे? The French citizens, अरे यार, the French citizens valued the ideas of liberty and equality discussed by Rousseau and Voltaire, etc. And these ideas formed the core of revolutionary ideology. So, an important term here is what is the ideology? So now enlightenment thoughts are not mere thoughts. Rather, whatever the ideas that they have given become the ideology of the revolution. जैसे कि आज के दिन में क्या होता है, राइट विंग, लेफ्ट विंग, ये आइडियोलॉजीज है, ये वादी और वो वादी, वामपंथी, दक्षिणपंथी, जो कुछ चलता रहता है. So at that time there was no वामपंथी, there was no दक्षिणपंथी. Rather, वामपंथी, दक्षिणपंथी, right wing, left wing is actually the outcome of French Revolution. You know that. In the French Revolution, immediately afterwards, in 1790-91, they formed the assembly. In the assembly, the people who wanted to be pro-tradition, pro-monarchy, pro-old system, they used to sit on the right side of the table. And the people who wanted to change everything, destroy the tradition, used to sit on the left side. So right wing, left wing शब्द जो आते हैं यहाँ से आते हैं, from the French Revolution. But anyway, so this, my point is that enlightenment thoughts formed the revolutionary ideology. Was it so? If you prove that to be yes, then you can talk about direct role tha ideas ka. So the thinkers drew the attention of the people towards existing political, economic and social apathy. We have discussed that. Now how they did that? We have to go back to our lecture on enlightenment. The first lecture on enlightenment, we discussed political, social, economic, physiocrats वाला देखा था हमने, church वाला देखा था, deism वगैरह, यही तो बात है ये. They openly criticized the autocracy of the monarchy and the dogma of nobility and superstition of the church. They created a revolutionary awakening among the people to the outbreak of the revolution. तो लोगों के मन में आग जला दी, दिखा दिया, देखो ये सब ऐसा होता है. Secondly, they are the ones who coined and popularized certain terms. And by the way, in the question, when they ask the question in UPSC, it's a 20 marker and you have to explain it further. यहाँ पे you add different thinkers के thoughts. Montesquieu, for example, this separation of power and against despotism. Voltaire for freedom of speech and not no abuse of religion. Rousseau for popular sovereignty. We will discuss all these people, right? So यहाँ पे आपको जब explain करोगे point को, you have to use that content from that lecture for one paragraph of answer writing. When you have to write this, you can elaborate on your own. आता है उतना अपना. So second point, they coined and popularized certain revolutionary terms and slogans like liberty, equality, fraternity, rule of law, city citoyen, homeland, individual rights, etc. ये बहुत important बात. You should understand that things happen in not vacuum. आज के दिन में हम बात करते हैं हिंदुइज्म, सनातन धर्म, राइट विंग, लेफ्ट विंग, रूल ऑफ लॉ, सिंडिकेटेड हिंदुइज्म या फिर नक्सलवादी, जो कुछ टर्म्स आप यूज करते हैं, ये टर्म्स आते कहाँ से? They are coined by historians, by sociologists, by anthropologists, by political scientists in the academia or in public, and then these terms encapsulate the entire phenomenon. They become catchy slogan to explain, interpret, and motivate people. So these terms have to be created. Unless and until you create the term, create the word for that, that thing is not easily comprehensible to common people and for nobody. You cannot talk about the things if it doesn't have a name. So naming कौन करता है? Thinkers करते हैं. So they coined and popularized the terms. It is very important aspect. And then the Enlightenment ideas were particularly popularized in France by the influence of American War of Independence. We know that after American War of Independence, the ideas became even more popular in France, directly and indirectly also. And revolutionaries used the ideas to formulate their strategy. We have, for example, a very important person, Abbe CS. I don't know how to pronounce the word. I am very sorry. Typically, in my high school, there was no French. I used to use Sanskrit. So, मैं क्या करूँ? French सीखा नहीं, संस्कृत सीख लिया बचपन में. So anyway, we have Abbe. Abbe मतलब father होता है. Abbot, Abbe. So he is actually belonging to clergy class, first estate, but he is towards the side of third estate. So उसने किताब लिखी थी What is the Third State? And in that book he has a fictional dialogue with Montesquieu and Rousseau, who by that time are dead. So the people who are actually participating in the revolution, in their own book, they are talking to these own thinkers. It means they are influenced by the ideas. कोई doubt ही नहीं है यहाँ पे. Similarly, its influence can clearly be seen in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. So the most important document, Declaration of Rights. The ideas, the rights आते कहाँ से है? वो भाषा कहाँ से आती है? From the thinkers' language. The ideas come from thinkers. So on the specific actions taken, specific historical actors present. So both actors and actions in both these terms during revolution, you see the impact and influence of the thoughts of Enlightenment thinkers. So there is no doubt. So philosophers created the conditions of ideology. So these arguments were used to justify. Then you go to next argument कि भाई ये सब ठीक है, but ऐसे कुछ नहीं होता. The significance is very insignificant, minimal. These are the people, these are the historians who focus more on the other section. Sometimes, not sometimes, mostly they are Marxist. They give focus on matter over mind. Material conditions are more important. Ideas are just reflection of material conditions. So, unlike American leaders, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, the thinkers did not participate themselves. At the time of revolution, none of them was alive. Montesquieu, Diderot, Voltaire, Rousseau, सब मर गए थे. They were not activists. They did not come on street. They did not create a political party. They did not lead the revolution. They were all dead. So, पहले तो directly thinkers' personal role is not there. If at all it is there, maybe we'll see it was through ideas, not through person. Secondly, books. ये भी हमने देखा है. We have talked of a historian called Robert Darnton. आपको याद होगा. Remember him? Grub Street Literature, Libel. So we have the publication list. We have the publishing industry's book sales data, from which we come to know that the reading of Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire was not as much. The large amount of reading that influenced common people was this Grub Street literature. इसमें क्या था? Scandal, libel, pornography, or you just take some kind of story from the कि Mary Antoinette क्या कर रही है? She is sleeping around, and Louis XVI just likes mechanical devices, so he just goes from one room to other room taking घड़ी. उसको घड़ी ठीक करना पसंद आता, घड़ी में स्प्रिंग करते रहता था, टाइम पास, मजा आता था. रात में उठ के पूरे वर्साई पैलेस पे 150 कमरे हैं, वो जाएगा हर कमरे में घड़ी ठीक करते रहेगा. सो ये सब इमेजेस किसने क्रिएट करी है? By these people, and then it led to something called as desacralization of monarchy. We discussed the term also. I have mentioned desacralized monarchy. So divine king, भगवान का अवतार, ये सब चीजें अब बगल में. So it damaged the credibility of the monarchy and led to desacralization of monarchy. And किसी भी एंगल से this is not high enlightenment. This is not what Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, this is not the encyclopedia that was in the mind of enlightenment thinkers. ये तो येलो जर्नलिज्म है. इसके इम्पैक्ट को आप इम्पैक्ट ऑफ एनलाइटमेंट थॉट तो नहीं कहोगे. हाँ, वन थिंग इज कॉमन बिटवीन द टू, हाई एनलाइटनमेंट एंड दिस काइंड ऑफ ग्रब स्ट्रीट लिटरेचर. The common thing is that both of them depend on publishing industry. Both of them are the outcomes of print revolution, print culture, printing culture. ये तो है. Both of them are also the outcome of reading revolution. People want to read, they're educated, they're literate now. ये दोनों में common है. But the high enlightenment ideas are consumed by generally middle class. And the lower class, which has become literate, which wants to read, does not consume Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu. Lower class consumes Grub Street literature. Lower class is more populous. सबसे अधिक मसल पावर उनके पास है और वो दिशा देते हैं. सो इम्पैक्ट दोनों का है एक्चुअली, बट अभी इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में इनका है. सो देयर इज नो इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ द हाई थॉट ऑफ एनलाइटनमेंट, रॉबर्ट डाल्टन, बट द मार्क्सिस्ट इंटरप्रिटेशन होल्ड्स more water relatively. He emphasizes a long-term structural factor. The French Revolution, not simply a political struggle, from the absolute monarchy towards democratic republicanism. It was a bourgeois revolution. It was a middle class revolution, essentially marked a class conflict. Middle class wanted its own freedom and rights. It represented the destruction of nobility and shift from feudalism to capitalism, because it is the middle class which wanted to go ahead with capitalism. And Enlightenment thinkers came from the middle class background and thus believed in peaceful transformation, not in revolution. It is also important for you to understand that all the thinkers in Enlightenment, do you know any thinker who has asked for revolution which is violent in nature? Not a single one. Rousseau comes very close for popular sovereignty, but he is exception. Most of them go for enlightened despotism. अगर उनको राजा थोड़े पैसे देता, दरबार में रखता, बोलता मेरा फिलोसोफर गाइड बन, एडवाइजरी कमेटी पे बैठ जा, चेयरमैन ऑफ द कमेटी बन, तुरंत खुश, राजा कितना बढ़िया, वाह वाह. That was the Enlightenment thinkers. They did not want the end of the ancient regime completely. They wanted the reform. They wanted their rights. They never recommended revolution. Rather, in this perspective, if you see, Enlightenment actually is revolution is actually anti-enlightenment. What was enlightenment? आप समझो. Remember the what is enlightenment by Immanuel Kant. I have uploaded the PDF. आपने देखी होगी. I think number 6, PDF number 6. So Kant कहता है you have to use the reason in the public so that there is everybody getting educated, everybody gets aware. So entire citizenry, subjects are literate, educated, aware, rational, critical thinking creature, and that puts indirect pressure on the government to amend its ways, to mend its ways, to perform better, to perform work for us. तो जनता को सियानी बना के छोड़ दो, सरकार के ऊपर प्रेशर आएगा, सरकार ठीक से काम करेगी. रिफॉर्म, दैट इज द एनलाइटमेंट आइडिया. कहीं भी कांट नहीं कहता जला दो, ये तोड़ दो, ये भग्न कर दो, नहीं बोलता. नेवर एवर. सो एनलाइटनमेंट एंड रेवोल्यूशन के अंदर एक भेद है. सो इफ यू गो मार्क्सिस्ट एनालिसिस, रेवोल्यूशन हैपेंड बाय मिडिल क्लास एंड वायलेंस इज बाय. तो मैंने आपको बोलते बोलते आगे वाला पॉइंट बोल दिया, बट कोई बात नहीं. वी हैव लेफेब्रे अगेन, दिस सेम पर्सन लेफेब्रे. He has, that we shall see tomorrow, he has divided the revolution into 4 phases. The first phase is aristocratic revolution. The second phase is middle class revolution. Third phase is Parisian mob, or let us call them people as such. And the fourth phase is great fear, or call them peasants and provinces. So if you trace the events of 1718 in one single year, in a matter of few months, from May, June, July, August, बस सितंबर तक जाओ, ये जो 5-6 महीने हैं, इस 5-6 महीने में revolution goes through 4 phases. Lefebvre, he is a very solid and a very strong historian on this issue. सोबोल, कैबन, लेफेब्रे, डेविड थॉमसन, ये 4-5 लोग ही है जो दुनिया भर में माने जाते हैं. बट एनीवे, सो वी हैव दिस 4 phase evolution emerging. So we have the middle class phase, but then he also says there is lower class phase also. ठीक है, हम देखेंगे all the 4 phases we have to see one by one later on. So in one way, the revolution was the antithesis of enlightenment, where enlightenment philosophers looked to an informed public opinion to exert an indirect restraining influence on the government and supported gradual progress of the society. The revolutionaries were committed to the overthrow of the ancient regime by direct action. So there is no connection. That is the argument from the side of Marxist. Then you go to your rational stance कि भाई दोनों extreme बहुत ज़्यादा हो गए. So we have to go for something which is in between. Indirect influence. The thinkers are important. They acted as catalyst. They were not useless. So the outbreak of the French Revolution was the result of the combined effect of various factors working together. It was a response and reaction to evils prevailing in the French politico-administrative system, social, religious and economic system. So even though the philosophers did not create the circumstances for the revolution, they certainly exposed the ills of the ancient regime and provided alternative vision. So revolutionary condition poverty, the hunger, the dissatisfaction primarily is not created by thinkers. वो है, but वो क्यों है, responsible कौन है, वो क्यों होना जरूरी नहीं है हमेशा, कुछ अलग हो सकता है क्या, ये सब मन के खेल जो शुरू किए उन्होंने. So they did not create the economic condition. Ancient regime is not created by thinkers. The class stratification within each order is not by thinkers. The economic crisis is not by thinkers. Poverty, cataclysm, the uh, catastrophes are not by thinkers. But man ki aag, direction, enemy, alternatives, this is all by thinkers. They created the terms. They've shed the light. मतलब अगर समझो अंधेरे में लाश पड़ी है, you can't see. Somebody should throw light on that, then you see. The light जो उस पर डालता है वो है enlightenment thinker. लाश तो पड़ी थी वहां पे, आपको दिखाई नहीं दे रही, बदबू तो आ रही थी, परेशान थे, परेशानी क्यों, बदबू किस चीज की है, यू डोंट नो. जब लाइट डलेगी, अच्छा ये सड़ा हुआ लाश है, लाइट जो डालने वाला था वो था एनलाइटनमेंट थिंकर. उसने लाश नहीं बनाई, उसने बदबू क्रिएट नहीं की. इट इज अ वेरी सिंपल एनालॉजी. सो the people were already suffering, the discontent was accumulating in them since a long time. The awakening created by the philosophers intensified the pain by drawing attention of masses towards limitation of existing regime. So the philosophers played the role of a catalyst, prakash dalne wala. Thinkers formed, second reason why it is important, thinkers formed one of the earliest forms of civil society. We have discussed this in the context of public sphere. We discussed salon, coffee houses, the clubs, debating clubs, etc. And these are civil society. दुनिया की पहली modern civil society starts with the thinkers. In the civil society, there is interaction between the state, between the classes. अमीर गरीब सब साथ में आते हैं, बात करते हैं, ideas exchange होते हैं. So you already outside the orders of three state, they have started to disappear, started to melt. कॉफी हाउस में लोअर एरिस्टोक्रेट, एक बूर्जवा मिडिल क्लास कैपिटलिस्ट बिजनेसमैन एंड एक अमीर किसान, तीनों आके बैठे कॉफी पी के बात कर रहे, राजा क्या क्या करे. These three people would not have met each other earlier. कहाँ मिलेंगे, कोई मौका ही नहीं था. And now they're exchanging ideas, sitting together as equal. The class structure has already started to change before the revolution occurred. So the ideas discussed in clubs and meetings resulted in breakdown of the stratification, fundamentally changing France's social organization. When the State General was called, we'll discuss that later, its rigid organization conflicted with the new informal organization and caused dissent, and the king's refusal to equality triggered their secession from the royal authority. We'll see what happened later on. The ideas only played a part after the revolution had begun, and it was used to justify the action. अब ये एक व्यू पॉइंट है कि रूसो हिमसेल्फ डिड नॉट रिवोल्यूशन, रादर इट इज रॉबेस्पियर who afterwards used Rousseau's name justify his own action. Generally यही हो, this is I think the most credible thing I see. यही होता है. आज भी देखो, कोई भी पार्टी क्यों ना हो, they just don't invoke the moral values all the time. They use moral values and some thinkers only when it suits them. बाकी समय कहाँ गए थे आपके थिंकर्स एंड मोरल वैल्यूज, वो बात नहीं करेंगे. एग्जैक्टली. सो व्हेन Rousseau's thoughts were suitable for revolutionaries, they use Rousseau. When you want to put the declaration on the popular sovereignty, you use general will. When Robespierre has to execute hundreds and hundreds of people, वो कहेगा मैं लोगों के लिए कर रहा हूँ, भले ही एक वर्सेस अनेक. क्यों? रूसो नहीं होता, रिवोल्यूशन नहीं होती. Had Rousseau not been there, revolution would not happen. Then it is actually sometimes can be turned other way around. Had revolution not been there, रूसो इतना बड़ा नहीं होता, वो तो मर चुका था. इन लोगों ने उसको सर पे उठाया, बाद में और बड़ा बन गया. So the reason is other way around. It is not Rousseau creating revolution, it is revolution creating Rousseau. So in the midst of the revolution, the leaders quoted these philosophers at their own convenience. The revolution embraced a radical ideology of popular sovereignty so that any abuse of power could be excused so long as it was achieved in the name of the people. Thus, the philosophers reflected public discontent. Now, this is important. भले ही selective, स्वार्थी use क्यों ना हो, but use है. So, it is reflective of public discontent. So the articulation of public discontent is given voice by these thinkers. Therefore, the role of those philosophers cannot be seen in isolation. It cannot be neglected. I hope आपके पास तीनों आइडिया क्लियर हो गए. Why the role is direct, why the role is not at all significant, and why the role is indirect. Now, depending on the question, you will write, and conclusion will vary from question to question. ये पूछा तो conclusion, वो पूछा तो ये conclusion. Simple. But the rational stance is that it is a combined effect of many factors. ठीक है. ये जो लाइन है यहाँ पे लिखी हुई, that is a very important line. That did not create the circumstances, but they exposed the ills and provided alternative vision. This is your fundamental thesis argument. ठीक है. Let me see if there are any quotes, any doubts. Sudeep, Vaishnavi, Kanishk, come offline, no? Mehboob, what happened? You came offline only for one day. Shaunak, Suraj, Shaunak, how are you? मेरा ब्रेक हो जाता है. No doubts. Okay. I am good. ठीक है. So we go to the next part then, and that is the political. I have already hinted at this factor. There was the emergence of the absolutist monarchy. When you go from medieval into early modern, and in the absolutist monarchy, what you have is the concentration of power in the hands of a national monarch. The power was earlier dispersed within some elements like feudal lords and church. So, for example, we look at Reformation. In the Reformation, multiple churches, Protestant churches were created whereby the national monarchy could have its own church. तो भाई पोप वहां से हमारा देश के अंदर इंटरफियर क्यों करे? हम अपने देश का चर्च हम चलाएंगे. यू आर एक्स्ट्रा टेरिटोरियल अथॉरिटी, हमारे टेरिटरी के अंदर हमारा अधिकार. इफ द रिलीजन का हेड टेरिटरी के बाहर है, दैट्स अ न्यूसेंस, दैट्स अ प्रॉब्लम फॉर आवर नेशन, हम उसको चलने नहीं देंगे. दैट वाज वन रीजन द इंग्लिश पीपल फॉर्म्ड प्रोटेस्टेंट चर्च and they broke away from Catholicism. National monarchies came with national churches also. In the same way, as I discussed some minutes ago, that the feudal lords की power भी धीरे धीरे with the rise of bureaucracy, tax collection, army and artillery, feudal lords became less important, less powerful. The functions were lost, the power was lost. So French polity was absolutist. The dynasty was Bourbon dynasty, and the divine rights of the monarch was the guiding principle. As a consequence, the French politico-administrative system was centralized in nature. Such system required a king of exceptional abilities for its effective government. So, अब इतनी पावर अगर आपके हाथ में दी है, तो चलाने के लिए आपके पास ताकत भी तो चाहिए. कोई वीक इरेजोल्यूट किंग को बिठा दो, पूरा सिस्टम कोलैप्स हो जाएगा. जो संगे मरकज होता है, यू नो संगे मरकज, मरकज जानते हो? No, that is maqsad, not markaz. Have you listened to Pakistan ki anthem? Pak sarzami shad baad, kishwari yaki shad baad, tu nishane shane ali shan arze Pakistan, markaze yaki shad baad. आपने नहीं सुनी? अरे सुनो यार. परचमे सिताराओ हिलाल, रहे बरे तरक्कियों कमाल. अरे बहुत अच्छी है. एनीवे, मतलब इंटरेस्टिंग है. ट्यून ट्यून अच्छी है. उसमें एक मतलब मरकज है यकी. मरकज मतलब कीस्टोन. यू नो व्हाट कीस्टोन इज? कीस्टोन स्पीशीज नहीं यार. You have, let us say, an arc. So this is the arc. You have various stones over here. So this central stone is the keystone. When you construct the arc, सबसे end में ये fit होता है, शुरू में नहीं होता. It's not that easy. So you have to create a scaffolding in such a way whereby till the point at the end this stone is put in, you are able to sustain the whole structure. but once it is put in, it takes all the pressure and then transfers it downwards. तो आपको ऐसे कोई स्ट्रक्चर को तोड़ना है, do only one thing, go there and remove this stone. There is no lime mortar, यहाँ पे सीमेंट यूज नहीं होता है, सब इंटरलॉकिंग स्टोन्स है, ऐसे एक दूसरे के ऊपर लटके हुए हैं. इसको हटा दो, इसको मरकज बोलते हैं. रिमूव दिस की स्टोन, एंटायर स्ट्रक्चर विल कोलैप्स, एंटायर आर्क विल कोलैप्स. तो क्यों? This is the one that absorbs all the pressure, concentrates all the stress and then transfers it next or downwards. So this stone has to be very strong. यहाँ पे अगर कोई ऐसा स्टोन होगा जो दब जाएगा तो पूरा स्ट्रक्चर गिर जाएगा. सेम थिंग हैपेंस विद द एब्सोल्यूटिस्ट मोनार्क. द मोनार्क इज दैट की स्टोन. सबसे अधिक प्रेशर वो लेता है, सबसे अधिक क्षमता उसकी चाहिए पूरे देश में. नहीं है तो पूरी सिस्टम कोलैप्स हो जाएगी, बिकॉज इट्स एब्सोल्यूट सेंट्रलाइज्ड पावर और कुछ. So it functioned well under Louis XIII and Louis XIV, but under the successors of Louis XV and Louis XVI, the evils of centralized despotism started becoming visible. Neither of the successors of Louis XIV were competent enough to tackle the complex situation. Therefore, economic and social unrest were allowed to culminate into a major political crisis, which became a prelude to the revolution. Now, let me give you some idea. I will call Louis को बस मैं L लिखूंगा, थोड़ा अच्छा रहेगा. Louis XIII, Louis XIV, Louis XV and Louis XVI. Look at the 6 kings. Oh, sorry, 4 kings. Louis XVI comes to power in 1774 and is executed in 92. It is in the reign of Louis XVI that finally the French Revolution occurs. But उसके पहले के राजा जो है, for example, this person rules for 60 years. This rules for 72 years, 71 years, and then we have Louis XIII also, but anyway, 71 years. So these are the longest. So these two people make up 18th century, and these people make up 17th century. 4 राजा में 200 साल निकाल लेते ये लोग, because the 2 kings came for long time, 130 years or so. Now Louis XIII के जमाने में the process of power centralization starts. 13 and 14 are the ones who gradually centralize all the power. So in the 17th century we have the high era of the early modern, when absolutism is coming up, centralization of power is happening. Especially in the case of Louis XIII, we have a prime minister called Richelieu. I don't know spelling क्या है उसका, RICHILIEU perhaps, I don't know जो कि spelling होगा इसका, Richelieu or something. He is the one who is the prime minister. He starts the process of administrative centralization, and Louis XIII fights quite a few of wars. Then you go to Louis XIV also. He is the most absolutist monarch you will ever see in entire French history. सबसे अधिक पावर उसके हाथ में. He is the one who fought multiple wars, Spanish Succession War, this and that. He is the one who denied any privilege to the aristocracy and church. उसके जमाने में ये जो मैंने कहा 3 states की जो मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, 3 states, first, second, third. In the era before Louis XIII, these 3 states were more important. On a regular basis, the representatives of all these 3 states used to meet together, and they used to have voting, and they used to run the nation. There are some people of the first state, some of the second state, and some of the third state. They will come, they will vote, they will discuss, deliberate. राजा का रोल है ही नहीं. राजा कौन है? Now राजा becomes powerful. So states बंद हो जाते हैं. Ultimately, here in 1789, finally the 3 states, States General is the name of the meeting of the 3 states. States General is called after almost little less than 2 centuries. यहाँ से वो बंद हो गए थे. क्यों बंद हो गए थे? Because these kings are enhancing their power. And this Louis XIV also is most absolutist. उसका famous sentence हमने देखा है, I am the state. याद है? When you study enlightened despotism, he says, I am the state. So it is personification of the entire nation into one monarch, divine rights. In the era of Louis XV, it is, you see, the stagnancy sets in. Rewards अभी भी होते हैं, but there is no reform. यहाँ पे रिफॉर्म हो रहे हैं, पावर बढ़ रही है, रिफॉर्म हो रहा है, पावर बढ़ रही है. नाउ देयर आर नो रिफॉर्म्स. देयर आर इंडिकेशंस कि भाई कुछ करो, नहीं आराम से बैठे, 60 साल चले गए, बूढ़े के मर गए. एंड द प्रॉब्लम्स दैट स्टार्टेड एट दैट टाइम स्टार्ट कमिंग अप इन द ईयर ऑफ लुई 16. लुई 16 जब सत्ता पे आता है, एक तो विलासी और भोगी किस्म का इंसान है वो, ठीक है, दैट आई डिस्कस ऑलरेडी. ही डजंट हैव इंटरेस्ट इन एनीथिंग. Not only that, he is very young. In 74 when he comes to throne, he is only 20 years. 20 साल का बच्चा है, पूरा देश संभालेगा. He unwisely, against the wise counsel of his ministers, enters into American War of Revolution. Already इतने वॉर हो चुके हैं, पैसे नहीं है, आप तो पूरे डूब गए. And then in the process of entire financial conflict that we shall see in some time, he is not coming out as a very strong ruler with opinion. Kabhi is taraf, kabhi us taraf. He is always vacillating. Sometimes he goes closer to third estate, then he comes back, goes closer to first and second estates. Then he says, okay, I'm with third estate. Then he runs away, then he comes back. So iska irresoluteness becomes problem. The people not only have lost any respect for monarchy, because of his irresoluteness, people lost all the trust for monarchy also. And then his wife is Marie Antoinette. She is the daughter of Mother Teresa, Maria Theresa of Austria, the great queen. Maria Theresa of Austria had a son, Joseph II, whom we have also seen in Enlightenment despotism. So Joseph II is the king of Austria. He is also the Holy Roman Emperor, which is no more holy, not in Roman, and it is not an empire. But anyway, it is called Holy Roman Empire. So जो इसका मैरी एंटोनेट का पति जो है फ्रांस का राजा, भाई है होली रोमन एम्पायर ऑस्ट्रिया का राजा, तो उसको किस चीज की कमी है? So she is spending money all the time, all the time. She character is questionable, that is one thing, but more than that, she is completely insensitive towards common people's needs. जैसे मैंने कहा, there is a कहानी है ऐसे, when people were dying out of hunger, उसने क्या किया पता है? She said कि I want to feel how people feel. मैं उनके दर्द समझना चाहती हूँ. तो उसने एक वर्साय का जो बड़ा सा महल है, वहां पे एक आर्टिफिशियल ये बनवाया, फार्म बनवाया. उस फार्म में शी गॉट सम शिप्स. शी वोर द कपड़े ऑफ अ शेफर्ड एंड सी कि अच्छा शेफर्ड लोग ऐसे रहते हैं, मुझे समझ में उनका दर्द क्या है. तो उसका पूरी नौटंकी और पूरी देश देख रहे हैं क्या चल रहा है. मतलब आप हमारे दर्द का मजाक बना रही हो. एनीवे, so it was a problem. She, because of her extravagant behavior, was called as Madame Deficit. Madame Deficit, because she used to spend so much of money that she used to cause the national budget collapse. So Madame Deficit was her other name in this Grub street literature. ठीक है. So the suffering of people increased enormously because of the aristocracy started misusing authority of the state for their own benefit. Now there is one interesting thing called as, I don't know how to pronounce, letters de cachet. अभी letters de cachet क्या होता था? It's like arrest warrant without naming the person who is to be arrested. If you are wealthy enough, you go to judiciary. Judiciary is manned by aristocracy. I am talking of the political abuse in the system. System में political problems क्या क्या है? One set of problems came because of centralization. Other set of problems came because of such kind of problems. Letters de cachet is the most egregious example of that. In that, you, if you have money, you go to the judiciary, just buy arrest. पैसे देके arrest warrant खरीद लो, जो कि sealed envelope होगा, किसी का नाम नहीं होगा. Then you just write a name you want of the person you want to get arrested, and then arrest the person. So it's the abuse of power. There is no rule of law. So people were frustrated. It was this accumulated discontent among the masses that came out in the form of the revolution of 1789. Is it clear? So we have seen the social structure, we have seen the economic causes, we have seen the enlightenment role, and we have seen the political structural problems. Now we go to the instances that happened just before the revolution, the immediate cause, and that was primarily a fiscal crisis. Dunya mein, I personally feel it is a very sensitive thing for the fiscal crisis destroys nation, and never take taxation so easily. Tax problems caused American Revolution. Tax problems will cause French Revolution also. Because the nation is rich, the government is poor, government has no money, they are spending extravagant amount on wars and luxury. पैसे कहाँ से आएंगे? Because who is the one paying taxes? The third state. That to the feudal economy, poor people. उन सब कितना चूस के कुछ तो बचेगा ना अंत में उनको जीने के लिए. So there was a point when government needed to spend more. They were not spending as per income. They were looking for income as per their expenditure. अब पैसे लाने कहाँ से लाए? Since 1770s and 80s, the problem started to come up again and again. This series of ministers. We have Turgot, we have Necker, we have Cologne, we have Briand. चार लोग आए एक के बाद एक 15-20 साल में. Everybody tried to bring some tax reform. The point was simply this: 95% people are not so powerful. We are taxing them. The money, the luxury is with those remaining 5%. उनको tax कौन करेगा? Who will bail the cat? The king doesn't want. King is like my weak king. I will not use. Ministers want to bring some tax reform. If there is no political backup, what will civil servant do? कुछ नहीं कर पाता. For the very bold reforms, you need to have political cover, like Narasimha Rao gave in the case of 1991-92. यहाँ पे nobody, king was not willing to do that. Simple करना बात एक simple थी. What you have at that time originally is regressive taxation. You want to, if you don't want to go towards progressive tax, it is fine. At least go towards equal tax for everybody. The nobles and the clergy are not paying any tax, even though they are rich. And the poor are paying all the tax, even though they are poor. It is the regressive tax system. In India, what we have is progressive tax. If you have less income, you pay less tax. As you go high in the hierarchy, tax percentage बढ़ जाता है. If you don't want to do that, at least equal percent to the church or nobility should pay some tax. Why they should spend only all the time? But who will tell them? Who will force them? अब इस पे एक बात और interesting है. And that thing is that the nobility frustrated है अभी भी. They remember एक जमाना जब उनके पास power थी. They want to get that back. Now the king is weak. They are looking for an opportunity to strike back, to reassert their power. Nobility is not anti-monarchy. Nobility needs monarchy. But nobility also needs to take back the power which were taken by Louis XIII, Louis XIV. अब वो देख रहे कि भाई अब 70 साल हो गए, अब हमारा मौका आया है, अब हम वीक राजा आया है, क्राइसिस में है, let us take the opportunity, let us reassert the authority. So when the king is coming to the nobility कि भाई मुझे आपसे टैक्स करना पड़ेगा, बोले नहीं करेंगे, because तेरे अधिकारी नहीं है. So every time the king comes with some minister to bring some tax reform, nobility says, you will not do it, we will not do it. If you want to do it, let us do it some other way, but you don't have authority. We don't permit you. So this kind of opposition by the aristocracy is the first stage in the revolution. When Lefebvre says the first phase of French Revolution is aristocratic revolt, it is this. That aristocracy at every stage for almost 10-15 years denies tax reforms or the authority of the king to go for tax reform. If the king has divine right, if he is absolute, it means he should be able to tax anybody. नहीं करने दे रहे. King is ultimately forced to summon States General जो 175 साल से बंद पड़ी है. So when king ultimately agrees, that itself becomes a symbol that the king doesn't control everything. There is power beyond and above the king. So it is the beginning of the fall of the French monarchy. That is the beginning point of the date on which States General is summoned and date on which it assembled 5 May या 6 May को आते हैं इकट्ठा वो 6th of May को. That is the beginning of French Revolution. The first phase ends there because that is the end of the all efforts done by aristocrats. Well, let us look at that story very quickly. There was no system of budget in France. There was no public budget. It is Necker ultimately, one of those four ministers who come in a series, as I said, we have Turgot, Necker, Colon and Briand. So Necker have publicly पहली बार public करता है ये हमारा budget है. People come to know 20% budget deficit. 20% deficit is a huge thing. पैसा आएगा कहाँ से? So Necker becomes very popular. But anyway, at that time there is no system of budget. The tax system was unscientific and irrational because rich and privileged classes was free from the burden of taxes, while all the taxes were paid by the commoners. The French participation of American War of Independence ruined the financial health completely because of an so I feel so funny that, as I said, it is British who fought the 7 Years' War, in which they got ruined, so they wanted to tax, therefore happened American Revolution. And when in that revolution French participated, they got ruined, they got bankrupt, they want to tax, so बनी French Revolution. Tax is very important. IRS ऑफिसर बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट होता है समझो आप देश के लिए. IRS नहीं रहेगा निजाम टूट जाएगा. चाणक्य ने क्या कहा था? कोशा मूल दंड. So finance is the basis of the power. Thus, the first problem before the French monarchy was to overcome the fiscal crisis. Louis XVI appointed a number of capable ministers such as Turgot, Necker, Colon and Briand, but they were dismissed one after another when they suggested the imposition of taxes on privileged classes. Thus, the economic bankruptcy of the French government and its desperate attempt to find a solution led to the summoning of the Estates General, which had remained in the state of animated suspension for the last 175 years. The news of the meeting of the State General made excited all sections, excited all the sections of the society. Everybody saw that now there is some opportunity for us. The middle class said that it is the opportunity for fundamental constitutional reforms. कि अब हम अपना reform करा के लेंगे. Privileged classes said कि भाई if the State General is assembled, the king cannot assert his authority, so we have got the power back. The peasantry, it was means by which the unequal distribution of taxation would be remade. So everybody is excited, and ultimately the States General is called. The entire story behind it. I don't want to walk you through it. Turgot ne reform kya laye, Necker ne kya laye. UPSC will not ask. It makes interesting story, but moral of the story is same. They all try some reform. Aristocracy says no. There are three. I want to tell you one thing. There are three institutes. One is Parlement, other is Assembly of Notables, and the third is States General or General in French. But anyway, so Parlement is a institute of the aristocracy. It is there in every province. इसका काम simple है, register the orders by the king, and unless and until they are registered, they will not be executed. So राजा order देता है कि tax लगाओ. Parlement means the group of aristocrats से हम register करेंगे ही नहीं. The moment they claim they will not register the orders of the king, it means that it will not be executed. So that says that now it is very difficult. So this avenue is closed. The ministers are changed. Then one minister calls assembly of notables. He says, let me assemble the notables. Notables मतलब who's who, बड़े-बड़े लोग. मतलब aristocracy के अंदर से will select a few of them who are on our side, form their committee, and in that committee will claim that this committee represents all of you. उनके थ्रू reform pass करवाएंगे. But again, this attempt is failed. It doesn't happen. And then the king is forced to announce the Assembly of States General after 175 years. अगर हर साल चलती, so there was a possibility itself would have evolved into the parliament, like the way it happened in Britain. यहाँ पे नहीं हुआ. 175 years gap because of the absolutism. So the entire social structure was, as I said in the very beginning of lecture, getting anachronistic. Q. So if you don't evolve, there is revolution. So there are three places. ठीक है, तो इसका आगे कुछ है क्या और? ठीक है, मैं विशाल स्टॉप हियर। ये वाला पार्ट कहानी शुरू करूंगा तो आगे दिक्कत हो जाएगी। आई कैनॉट स्टॉप इन बिटवीन, इट्स अ लॉन्ग स्टोरी। सो टुमारोज हैंड आउट एंड दिस पार्ट विल गो टुगेदर। ठीक है, सो लेट अस look at any doubt if you have. अच्छा Kanish, no problem. Yes, Cardinal Rishlu. Although we don't study Shonak, but yes. Any other doubt you have? State General क्या है? सूरज, State General is the assembly of the representatives of each state. तो जैसे मैंने कहा था शुरू में कि you have 3 states. Let us say this is a triangle society. State 1, that is your clergy class. State 2, nobility. State 3 is middle class and lower class, collectively all the common people. Now what you do is you take some representatives, and some representatives and form a meeting of first, second and third state in the assembly. This assembly of the representatives of each state is collectively called as states general. मतलब उनकी सभा है, उस सभा में हर एक के उम्मीदवार आते हैं, मिलके बात करते हैं, वोटिंग करते हैं, निर्णय लेते हैं। ठीक है, so that states general is the meeting of the representatives of the state. Is it clear? Okay. Any other doubt? No doubt. ठीक है, so shall stop here today and we'll resume tomorrow. ठीक, चलो then. Thank you.